Hi everybody, my name's Leanne Harding and welcome to the webinar today. We're going to be talking about communication matters. So later on, very soon, we'll be joined with my colleague Sandy Clark and she'll take us through this presentation as well. And I can see that there's a few people, some of my Kids Matter colleagues actually online as well too, so I'm sure that they'll be happy to join in the chat as well too. So what I'd like you to know is that Kids Matter Early Childhood is funded by the Department of Health and Beyond Blue, and with partnerships with Early Childhood Australia and the Australian Principals Australia Institute, as well as the Australian Psychological Society. So today you'll see, and I noticed some people have already started using the chat. So on the left-hand side, you can see that there's a few names there and people have been greeting and saying hello to each other. So this is an interactive webinar. So what we'd like you to do is to actually, just making sure that I'm on mute, is to share some of your thoughts and ideas with us by way of the chat. So that way we can actually share our collective knowledge as well too. At the end of the webinar, there'll be a survey for you to complete, and also you'll have an opportunity to have a certificate sent to you as well too. If you're joining with a group of people, you'll also receive certificates as well too. So make sure you put all their names in on that survey when you have a look at the end of the webinar. And also there'll be opportunities, if you're not already a registered Kids Matter Early Childhood Service, to join and make it actually official. We also want to make sure that we're all taking care of ourselves throughout this webinar as well today. So making sure that not only sharing your experiences, but only share when you're feeling comfortable as well too. And making sure that you're taking care of confidentiality and as I said before, sharing all your wonderful collective knowledge and your skills and experiences as well too with everybody who's attending today. This webinar will be recorded, so it will actually sit on our website, so you can actually have a look and view it later on, and you can actually share it with some of your other colleagues as well. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional lands on which we meet today and pay respects to elders past and present. So in the chat, it would be really great for you to actually acknowledge the country that you're on today. I'm on Larrakia land, so I'm in Darwin, and I'd also like to acknowledge that Aboriginal people have been nurturing and teaching children on this land for many decades. And if you're not sure of what land you actually are on today, that's probably a really good idea to actually have a bit of a research and find out as part of your own reconciliation journey. Now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Sandy Clark.
Thanks, Leanne, and hello to everyone. It's good to be here.
Great, Sandy. And so today what we're going to be doing throughout this presentation is we're going to encourage you to share your Kids Matter experiences, whether it be what you've actually been doing at your service or whether it's been actually using some of the resources as well too. We're going to be engaging in conversations about communication, how important it is for relationships and the challenges that might actually have as well too. Some people might be really great communicators and some people might sort of find it a little bit challenging. So we'll find out some strategies today as well. We'll also explore what active listening skills are and how we can actually gain some more information about that and perhaps think about what area that you might like to improve in as well too, and some strategies. And towards the end, we will talk about what sorts of things that you might, excuse me, you might be planning to do later on down the track. So some goals that you might have in mind, whether it is about registering to become official or is it attending any other webinars or having a look at some of the resources we're actually going to be sharing with you today. And they'll actually be sitting in the chat box for you, so those links will be there. Right, we are going to
go on to a poll next, start off with that. And we're going to be looking at what have you been learning and doing to grow your communication skills. So there's an opportunity, it's a multi-choice, so you can certainly pick more than one. And there's a number of different areas on Kids Matter that you may have been involved in, but also other areas too. So please let us know in the chat if there is something else. So we'll leave this up for a little bit longer just to see what people are responding. And it looks as though we must have quite a few people who are registered with Kids Matter here, because talking about exploring Kids Matter resources related to this particular professional learning topic.
It looks like some people have actually had a look at the Stop, Reflect, Act model as well too, which is really good. And we'll touch on that, but we won't really be exploring that too much today.
No, but just the building skills in communication and active listening. And I know we all have skills in communication and active listening, but I know, Leanne, that when I've actually gone through this particular professional learning topic and have been practicing or being reminded of and practice those skills in general life, in my work and at home, it has really made a difference to my listening and to general conversations too. I don't know if you found that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Every time you're actually talking and communicating with people, you sort of think about, did they actually understand what I said? And, you know, and reframing and rethinking about what it is that you're actually, you know, listening and understanding as well too.
I think we'll close the poll there. Thank you for that. And move on. Oh, it is coming out. So this webinar is based on one of the topics from the Kids Matter Professional Learning. It's called communication, and it comes from a framework component called Working with Parents and Carers. If you're attending the webinar today and you're registered with Kids Matter, this will contribute towards starting this topic. The communication topic itself focuses on 4 key areas. Firstly, about communication skills for positive relationships. And in this, we really look at sharing an understanding of why communication is important to building positive relationships between early childhood services and families. I think we know that communication skills are essential to building collaborative partnerships with families, as they help us build trust and gather more information about the other person, giving us a broader understanding of both them and their situation. Active listening, okay? How much thought do you put into the way that you listen? Because listening is more than simply hearing someone. Active listening involves a set of skills that require practice, and in this part of the professional learning topic, we explore and practice some of these listening skills. Things such as attending, following and reflecting, empathy, open and closed questions, and summarising. We also consider effective communication with families. Effective communication is a critical part of partnership with families. And in this part of the topic, we develop an understanding of the importance of good communication skills and how to communicate effectively with families. We explore the elements that help to set the scene for effective communication, as well as reflecting on some of the barriers to effective communication. In your everyday work, you're developing and demonstrating your communication skills and experience with a range of families. Sometimes this communication can be challenging and complex, and will require you to draw on all your experience and skills to think about how to best approach these conversations. The last part of this topic it introduces a model called Stop, Reflect, Act. And this is a model which supports educators to respond to families, including thinking about difficult or complex conversations. The Stop, Reflect, Act is a broad but really useful framework that can be applied to all kinds of everyday interactions. Today, though, we're going to be specifically looking at the active listening and effective communications with families. So we'll go back to Leanne and another poll.
Yes, so we know that we provide reflective, we do reflective practice as well too. So how often in your reflective practice do you actually take time to reflect on how you're communicating with others? So is it something that you do perhaps just in your head? You think about when you've had the conversation, it could come to you later. Do you actually write it down as part of your reflective practice? Or do you think that maybe something that could be something that you might, you could do in the future perhaps as well too? So maybe in the chat, let us know what form of communication, who are you communicating with that you're reflecting on? Is it how you communicate with families, how you communicate with the children, or mostly about how you're communicating with your colleagues, or any other types of communication? So what is it that is your main focus of your reflections that you do? So I see that most people usually do some sort of reflective reflection on how they're communicating, which is great.
And I've got a comment in the chat here too about usually reflecting when conflict arises, which I think is very true of a lot of us, because then we tend to reflect about what has happened and why it's happened. It's getting quite a few comments through now about who do you reflect with, what conversations do you reflect about families and children, and also with colleagues, communicating with colleagues, and also how one comes across on the phone, which is, a different mode of communication again. And in fact, just one meaning, isn't it? Yeah, because you can be easily misinterpreted over the phone as well too, because you don't have those cues. I'll tell a story, Sandy, where I actually had a conversation with a parent once and over the phone, and he didn't quite get what I was trying to say, so I sort of slowed my speech down so he could understand me, and he shocked me because he said, "Oh, don't patronise me with that tone," and it's just like, oh, I wasn't actually, I didn't feel like I changed my tone, it was just that I had slowed it down, but he actually, that's how he felt about it. So that was a really, a really awkward moment for me, and it really made me reflect on how actually people can misinterpret how you're saying things or what you're saying as well too. So it was very tricky. All right, well, we'll stop. Thank you very much. Yes. All right, so let's have a bit of a discussion about your reflections about how you communicate. So what's your manner when you communicate? So do you stop and you listen to somebody when they're talking, or do you give them a quick response? Do you really take the time to think about, is it something that I really need some time to really connect with this parent? I mean, we often are really busy doing more things, multiple things at once as well too, so that can be a little bit tricky to finding the right time. Do you have a particular parent that you actually do connect with but avoid other parents as well too? We often have a connection with certain families, so we find it easier to strike up a conversation or talk to them about things, and not necessarily those who we feel uncomfortable with or don't have that relationship or connection with. And am I aware of the parents that I don't communicate with often? So if perhaps you don't see them very much,
because they might they might drop their child off or you're not there? Or is it about you just haven't connected with them? So thinking about, all right, well, I haven't seen or spoken to this parent for a while now, then maybe I should really take the time to connect with them, because those connections and relationships are really important. It is really sad when, you know, and also most parents don't talk to me, so thanks, Greta. So that's about building those relationships, and sometimes it's about connecting, the educator connecting families as well too, I suppose. So when do you communicate? Do you normally do it when at drop-off time, at pick-up time? If it's a lengthy conversation, do you need to have? Do you suggest that perhaps it might be more appropriate to have a meeting that's less, at a time that's less busy, perhaps? What about connecting in different ways? We spoke about talking over the phone or communicating over the phone, perhaps through emails, through notes. We also have a poster which we'll share with you soon. It actually shows different ways that we can actually communicate as well too. So what sorts of things should I or shouldn't I say? Are my responses appropriate? So maybe taking that time to stop and think about what it is that has been said, or how I need to respond to that, or do I need to respond to it, or do I need some time to really think about it first? And it is okay if you don't know the answer, let the parent know, and if it's some information they want, you can say, well, you know, perhaps I might I'll get back, you know, I will get back to you later on, and make sure you do follow that up as well too. And where do I say them? So is it just at the front door? Is it in the playground? Is it in the, is it in the room where the child is? Is the area actually private enough and respectful enough as well too? So Catherine Hayden, she's in one of our professional learning videos, 3.1. She suggests having a look at different educators that you, perhaps at your service, and just observing them, how they communicate, looking at their tone, the way that they're talking, when do they actually chat to their families, what's their body language. It's a really great way to have a look to see how other people are actually communicating and learn from them as well too. All right, I'll pass over to you, Sandy.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that, Leanne. I've been reading all the discussion in the chat, and it's been really interesting to see that the conversations have been going on about different forms of communication, different ways that people reflect on their communication as well. There was one interesting comment about someone talking about practicing mindfulness before they have some of those conversations with families, and just those various forms of communication that happen. We'll have here posing a question for you about the art of talking with families. How do you regularly practice the art of talking with and listening to families? And this is a quote really that comes from the professional learning video that we have, and certainly talking with families is an art, and communicating with families is an important part of an educator role, but not necessarily something that everyone considers when they enter the early childhood profession. We do know that communication at times is complex, and for educators communicating sometimes difficult or complex things about children and their families can be challenging and even a bit frightening. It's such a vital part of our role. We really need to practice the art of talking regularly, both talking and listening. And communication is a really important skill that we need to deliberately develop. So when you think about the question that we have posed here about how do you regularly practice the art of talking with and listening to families, some questions to think about. And I know that some people have already responded to this, But how do you practice? Do you spend time reflecting on how you handle queries from families? Do you include communication as part of your team discussions? Do you actively practice skill development maybe during team meetings? How often do you share your experiences of responding to parents with your colleagues? And how does your service work with families who have special communication needs, such as English as a special language, or hearing or vision impairment? I think they're all questions to consider when you're talking about how do you regularly practice the art of talking with and listening to families. You might like to write about that as well. In the meantime, we'll go to another poll about what you find is the most significant challenges to do with communication. Once again, it is multi-choice, I'm thinking. But, yeah. What do you find the most challenging in your communication with families? That is what we have here, some things about finding the right time and place amongst all the distractions, and it's a really important consideration. And certainly if you have a place that is available that you can offer, particularly if the subject is more confidential or the family wants to discuss in private, then that's really helpful to have in an early childhood setting.
Yeah, it looks like it's not multiple choice though, Sandy, so I think people are just there. Yeah.
Having
that's
to,
okay.
And yeah, certainly that is the major one is finding the right time and place amongst all the distractions. And yeah, and even the time, I guess there are some things sometimes that you have to respond to immediately if they're emergencies. But for others, if it's not the right time, then you can respond to a parent by explaining that it isn't a good time, but offering a more suitable time to follow up, and letting them know that you are there, that you are available, but that the timing just doesn't work at that present time.
And I think that some of the things that have come up in the chat too, Sandy, are you know, people are saying that, you know, the parents don't want to spend time in chatting. But you know, it's tricky because it's an opportunity for us to develop those relationships, because if you don't have a you know, a solid relationship or a good relationship with a family, with parents, then you might find it really hard to develop that good communication as well too. So they really do go hand in hand. So I think relationships is really the most important, and you know, like a few people have said, connecting about the child, so saying something positive about the child, and then using that as an opportunity for you to actually engage in those conversations.
Yeah. And certainly just building up, it may not be having a conversation all the time, but yes, providing one or two comments about their child and what's happened, and really showing that you know their child and what's important to that family, and perhaps more constant contact rather than lengthy or lengthy conversations is a good way to start. All right, I think we'll leave that one there and move on. Okay, we're actually going to be talking about some active listening skills over the next 5 minutes, and during this time you might like to take note of the attending skills that you're using or maybe aren't using, or those that you notice that we're using. Okay, there are 3 key skill areas related to listening: attending, following and reflecting. So we'll start with the attending. Okay. When we talk about attending, what we mean is that we're focusing all our attention on what the person we're listening to is saying and doing. Okay, and while that might sound simple, it can sometimes be really difficult to do. Sometimes we respond automatically, and that's something that we all do. And there are often distractions that are going on around us, and also that internal chatter that we have constantly in our heads about what's happening, what we're planning to do, what we're thinking about, what we might be reflecting on as well. But attending starts with being present for the other person, okay? And it involves four simple but important forms of communication. Thinking about eye contact first of all, which is one of the most basic but significant indicators that we're listening. And eyes are a really powerful connection to another person. But also remembering too that there are cultural variations and that there are no specific rules for eye contact. In some occasions, too much eye contact, particularly with an authority figure, isn't considered appropriate. So you'll need to observe the person you're speaking to and use their level of eye contact just to guide your own. Another area is about vocal quality. Okay, the tone of your voice, your rate of speech, your speaking volume can all indicate whether or not you're actually engaged in the conversation. For example, a slow, flat tone with no changes in your voice will often indicate boredom. In contrast, pauses and variation and inflection can indicate empathy and understanding. We talk about verbal tracking, which means staying with the topic of interest that's presented by the other person. Not changing the subject indicates to the other person that what you're saying is important, that you're paying attention and that you're listening with interest. And attending in this way often involves resisting that temptation to preempt what the other person might say or jumping in to tell them all about when you had a similar experience. So certainly verbal tracking helps you to stay in the moment and keep focused on the topic. Body language, both positioning and movement is an important form of attending. More than half of what we communicate is actually through our body language. And it certainly signals to the other person that you're listening and engaged with the conversation. And just generally keeping an open posture without necessarily crossing your arms or your legs and leaning forward slightly, having an expressive face and using encouraging gestures helps to indicate that you're following and listening and attending to the person who's talking to you as well. So any comments about, I'm just having a look in the chat to see if there's anything further happening in the chat. So any comments about what we're talking about before we move on to the next poll?
Thanks, Sandy, for that information. So now what we're going to do is thinking about the attending skills that Sandy already spoke about before, facial expressions, eye contact, different types of body language, your quality of your voice, the verbal tracking as well too. So which attending skill do you feel most comfortable and confident using? I don't know why that families don't read written communication is in there. I think that's like a little bit of a typo perhaps. And so we've got eye contact and facial expressions. That's really important. That's great. Yeah, body language is about making sure you're that you are actually in a position so you can actually have those, you know, people feel that you're actually listening and leaning into the conversation as well too, and being aware of the vocal quality. I'll just stop the poll there. Yeah, I think, and it's good to, and also something else, so Stacey's put in there, I think I'm good at listening, which is a really great skill, because I think that sometimes it's not just about talking, it is about half the communication is actually listening, and really listening, because often we can be really distracted by what's going on. What do you think, Sandy?
Absolutely. I think I mentioned before, listening isn't just hearing either. It's a very active skill to be involved in.
That's right.
And attending here, Penny's made an interesting comment how it's hard not to be mentally preparing what you want to say next. And that does distract us if we're getting our responses ready. And it does take a lot of practice to be able to actually stick with and be present with what someone's saying rather than anticipating what's going to be saying and getting ready for your bit as well.
Definitely.
Now there was some... Yep, go ahead.
Go, Sandy. Sorry, Sandy.
There were a couple of comments in the chat that people hadn't been able to hear what I was saying, so I was just checking with you, Leanne, that you could hear. Okay.
Yeah, I think there's a slight lag between just because we're on our phones as well too, so that might be part of the reason why people might be missing some of the conversation. But I think from my end, it seems to be okay.
It's doing okay. All right then.
Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so let's have a look at some active listening skills and talking about empathy as well too. Sandy touched on it before, and so listening is the starting point of effective communication, but to be able to really listen to somebody, as I said before, you really need to tune in. It's not just about listening and taking it in, but it's also sort of really thinking about what it is that's been said. Giving those people that we're talking in particular parents, giving them our full attention and listening in a manner that's quite active. So when we're tuned in like this, it allows us to be empathetic. So an empathy is the effort we make to recognise, understand and respect the feelings of others. So we can demonstrate this empathy through attending and also through our active listening skills. So by active listening, we mean not only demonstrating that you're paying attention, but they've correctly heard what the other person has said. A parent you talk to might not necessarily articulate their feelings, but sometimes you can actually interpret what those feelings are by paying attention to their tone of voice, their body language and other verbal skills as well too. So you could describe this as reading between the lines. So when we listen actively, we tune into the other person and monitor our own internal self-talk at the same time. So it's not just our body language, it's actually being in tune to seeing what the person that you're listening to, looking at their body language and their tone as well too. So I recently read an article, actually, one of my colleagues shared it with us, and it was talking about how to increase your empathy. And so the suggestion was to ask someone how they're doing and then stop and really listen to them. Really listening with more than one of your senses, as I mentioned before, paying attention to the person's body language, their facial expressions and their overall demeanour, as well as what they say. The suggestion was you could do this with somebody at the grocery store or at the cafe, or you could even try it with a friend of yours. We all have a tendency to breeze through some interactions on autopilot, but if you want to actively work on connecting with others, they're suggesting you should try this at least once a day. Ask the question more sincerely so they know you actually want to know and are not necessarily looking for a quick automatic, oh, I'm good, response. It's a really slight change of the inflection in the question and people will know that you really mean it. But let's be careful because there is the difference between sympathy and empathy. The sympathy means feeling compassion for somebody else, whereas empathy is the ability to understand and even feel the emotions of somebody else. So it's much deeper and it's much more personal as well too. So ask someone how they're doing in a way that shows that you actually want a deeper, more personal answer. So maybe you can try that and see how that works. And I can see Penny's put in the chat about, children can be helped by talking about characters in the story and trying to, and demonstrating empathy. How do you think that they might feel about that? What do you think they might be thinking as well?
We're going to look at more explicitly at some of what the active listening skills are. And although this session is about communicating with parents and carers, these skills actually are for use for anyone. Megan had put in the chat earlier, I think we need to listen to children and encourage them to be positive communicators as well. And these are all skills certainly that we use when communicating with children. So let's start at the top there, just thinking about what are minimal encouragers. Okay, they're brief prompts that we use to encourage the flow of conversation. So you might not even be aware that you're doing it sometimes, but if someone's talking, you may be going, yes, or, okay, or I see. And non-verbal encouragers are things such as nods or gestures, smiling, or other facial expressions that we're using to indicate that we're there with that person, that we're engaging with what's being said and without interrupting the flow of them speaking. Next, active listening skills, reflection. So what is it, Leanne?
Yeah, thanks, Sandy. That's right. So, you don't really need to get into a big conversation. It could be just a quick, spontaneous, comment or something like that to get a response from the parent. So the next one is reflection. So this involves paraphrasing or restating the content, the feelings and the meaning of the words that you've heard. So reflection encourages parents to express themselves further and helps to promote trust in a conversation. It also shows you have empathy for their situation rather than rushing through the conversation. A powerful use of reflection is to reflect the feeling of what they're saying or showing through their body language and why they might be feeling that way, for example. So it sounds you might be worried, you might be a little bit worried about your son lately because he hasn't wanted to come to childcare. So, so you're actually providing that, being empathetic towards the family as well too. So reflection helps the parent feel they've been listened to and keeps the conversation on track. It can also help the parent clarify their thoughts.
The third one is questioning. Okay, and there are two types of questions. We have open questions or closed questions. And they're both useful in active listening, but they serve different purposes. The open questions really encourage more detailed responses or give people an opportunity really to tell their story and include details that they want to, rather than just a yes-no answer. So it might be questions, things like, what are your concerns about your son? Or how did it happen? So it really draw the speaker out, and they allow access to deeper and more meaningful information. On the other side, closed questions are used to obtain facts or to prompt for specific information. And questions of this kind can be answered with a single word or phrase. And their purpose sometimes is to contain or to refocus a conversation. And they can also decrease nervousness and hostility just by focusing on concrete details. things such as how many children do you have or what ages are they. Just be careful though about too many closed questions in a row because they can begin to sound a bit like a cross-questioning someone.
Absolutely. That's right. So the next skill is summarising. So summarising allows you to organise and succinctly express the content, the feelings and the meaning of what you've heard. It allows us to review what's happened during a conversation. It makes transitions from one topic to another and concludes the interaction at the appropriate time. So instead of the conversation going on and on and on, so you can actually summarise what it is. There's no confusion about what the conversation was actually about. So, and if perhaps a parent might have a question about something in particular and you're not really quite sure of what the answer is, you can say, I understand that, you're concerned about this. I'm not really quite sure just yet. Perhaps, I will get some information for you and then I'll get back to you. So, and will that be okay? And so therefore you're summarising the concerns of the family and then also saying that you're actually going to be following it through as well too. So that's summarising. Thanks, Sandy.
Okay. Well, look, finally, the last one is about pauses and silences. Okay. Pausing encourages a parent to continue talking, and silences can be useful for when a parent's thinking about what has been said. It can also be important to remember when you're talking with someone where English is their second language, to remember that often they're having to translate a lot of, in their head, a lot of what's being said. So rather than jumping in, allowing a bit of time for that to happen. Also, if you resist the temptation to fill the silence, a parent might open up a bit more. Okay. Just learning to recognise when silences are needed and how long these should be is an important part of active listening. And for some people, silences can be really uncomfortable. So just being aware of your own comfort or discomfort with silence is important too.
That's exactly right. And sometimes it depends on the conversation that you're having as well too. So it could be, if it is a deeper conversation of something that is quite concerning, that's when both of you need to have that time to actually think and reflect and, consider what it is you're going to say next, particularly if it is a tricky conversation. You really need to digest a bit of the information before you actually do respond, and the same for the parent as well too. So just being aware of these skills too can help you reflect on your own conversations that you're having and also allow you to practice some of them specifically as well. And certainly in the professional learning, you do get an opportunity to practice it, to feel what it's like to use them and to recognise as well when other people are actually using some of these skills to encourage active listening. Yeah, I was just going to say, Sandy, that the Stop, Reflect, Act model that you were speaking about at the beginning of the session as well too, that we're not really touching too much on today, is there's a really great video and example of educators, an educator and a parent actually modelling those active listening skills, and you can see where they've actually paused, where the educators summarised and emphasised, and it's a really great video actually to go back and have a look at.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And it's good because you have the thought bubbles about what's actually going on internally as well. So it is. Shall we move on though to the next slide, which is actually a poll. So putting this one up about which of the active listening skills are you going to start using more when you're communicating with families? What people already, most people responding about pauses and silences. Which is great. And it's good to recognise that pauses and silences are part of a communication skill, because sometimes we think it is about, most skills are actually about how we talk and what we talk about.
That's right. And, you know, different people have, there's multiples of personalities out there. So, you know, some people take, like me, I take longer to process. So, you know, I need to sort of think about what it is that's being said and sort of work out, all right, well, is this what they actually mean? And then respond to it that way. Other people just jump in. And maybe they shouldn't just jump in, but, you know, but they you know, and it's a matter of, you know, each type actually taking that step back and thinking about, all right, when's the time to actually start to say something, or when do I really need to stop and think and give an opportunity for the other person to respond.
I think it's also giving a person your time as well, which is really valuable and really honouring that person, that you're prepared to just sit with them and wait for a bit.
That's right, and it is a bit challenging, given, you know, particularly if you're having those conversations where there's children around and it's, you know, it's a bit of a fleeting conversation that you're having, but it's still, you know, it's still really important, and it's, you know, it's a great, as I said before, perhaps just having a go and just trialing out yourself, maybe with your partner or with your colleagues as well. Yeah, just practicing.
Not many people for the minimal encouragers, and I wonder if that's because that's something that we do so much of, and that you know, people are very good at doing it too. Yeah.
Yeah, and summarising is quite high up there as well too. So, you know, that's also a skill, isn't it? Because you're really summarising demonstrates that we actually have really listened to what the conversation is, and we actually understand it. But I think summarising is so important because it gives us clarity about what it is that really have we heard is that the actual, you know, what it is that we actually have heard, is it true? Oh, thanks, Janelle's put the link in for the professional learning and also the SRA model as well too.
I love Alicia's comment. As a family daycare provider, I often suffer from too much talking. When the parents come, it's like, yeah, an adult, please talk to me.
That's true, yeah. And, you know, there's times where you might just have a general conversation, but if it's something that's a little bit more in-depth, particularly about the child, and it's something about their development or something that they've done or some concerns the parent might have or you might have, that's when some of those strategies really come into their own, and where you really need to start practice, you know, really need to practice those and help to support your communication skills. Okay, Sandy.
Okay, thank you. So just as we're coming towards the end of this session today, just thinking about why you came today. Do you have further questions? And if so, just put them in the chat so that we can respond and share. Okay. In the previous poll, we looked at which aspect of active listening that you were going to focus on. And I'd be interested to know what other learning and reflection can you put into action straight away from today. For those of you who are already registered with KidsMatter, this today may encourage you or support you to move on to this topic of professional learning. And if you're already engaged with it, it would be great to hear from you how you've been progressing with it and what you may have done. If you're not a registered KidsMatter service, then you might like to share with us what you're doing in this space or any future planning that you may have. And it's always good to know about your achievements and challenges that you've experienced in this whole area of communication, but also in your KidsMatter journey and what you've experienced so far. Having a look at some of the comments that might be coming up in response to some of those questions. Sometimes it's hard to communicate with people, so it's good to learn new strategies, absolutely. And it's also good to just reflect on what it is that you do. I think we do sometimes take communication for granted. And that's why I think doing any sort of professional learning around communication is great, because it does actually focus on some of those individual skills and gives us an opportunity to practice them. And like any skill, some of us need more practice than others, or we may need more practice in various areas as well. So I'll leave all the chat happening and move on to Leanne again.
Thanks, Sandy. Yeah, I think that it is really tricky, conversations with families, or just conversations in general. So communicating skills is something that it's not necessarily is inherent. It's something that we often need to build on, particularly as educators. So thinking about, what is it that we what kind of skills do we actually need to improve in, and thinking about what what is it that we're going to focus on in the future. So it'd be great to hear what your reflections are, and thinking about where you're going to go from here, and which strategies do you think that you need to actually improve in. These webinars are really fantastic to give you opportunities to reflect on your practice, to gain a little bit more information and understanding, and then starting to put those into action with goals that you might actually have developed from this. So yeah, tell us in the chat what you've got out of today and what you might like to improve in, and if there's any particular areas or questions that you might have for that fact, please add them before we finish this afternoon. Before we leave, I wanted to share with you some of the other things that you can do to continue the Kids Matter learning. So we do, as I mentioned before, this webinar is actually being recorded, so you'll be able to have a look. You'll receive a link to that in about a week's time, and you'll be able to go back and watch it again, or you might like to, as I mentioned before, share it with your educators. There'll also be the slides on the website as well too, so you can go back and view those as well. We also have other webinars coming up in the future. So on the 2nd of November, I spoke a little bit about tricky conversations, and so there will be a webinar on tricky conversations with families, and that's looking at topic 3, helping children with mental health difficulties. So you might be interested in registering for that. Thanks, Sandy. She's putting the link in the chat for us. Also, on the 15th of November, we also have another webinar titled Help Me Seek Help, Make It Safe. And that's part of our Keeping Mental Health in Focus series. And also, you can continue the Kids Matter conversations by joining in. If you are an officially registered Kids Matter Early Childhood Service, you can continue the conversation through our network meeting. If you haven't already registered, then and you are a long daycare, family daycare, if you work in outside school hours care, am I missing something, Sandy? A preschool, a kindergarten service, and and so
early childhood service, really, yes.
Yeah, so if you'd like to start the journey to become an official Kids Matter Early Childhood Service, you can go to our website and have a look at our Getting Started videos. We also have a Getting Started webinar as well too. And also there are some live events happening over the next few months as well too, so you can tap into those, and they're also at varying times throughout the day. So hopefully they should suit most of you, whether you be an early riser or having a look at them late in the afternoon or in the middle of the day. So now let's have a look. Is there anything in the chat there, Sandy, that we wanted to?
There was a couple of people have thought about what their plans are after this webinar. Fiona has written about reflecting on and reviewing communication practices within their preschool service, which is a really great place to start. He talked about a useful strategy is acknowledging feelings first, setting limits, and then suggesting an opportunity or an action afterwards. Yes, and so a number of comments about developing reflective practices for ongoing learning around communication, which is great to know.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. I think we're just about the end of our webinar, and I think the survey's about to come up now. So thank you so much for joining us today. I hope that we have given you some great strategies and ideas, and you can take something away from you to reflect on your communication strategies. And also, don't forget, it's about relationship building. So you need to have good relationships in order to have good communication. So Sandy, is there something that you wanted to say before we finish off?
Thank you, Leanne, and thanks to everyone as well. It's been great to join you all this afternoon, and to talk about communication, which is such an important part of our everyday experience and everything that we do, and as Leanne's saying, an important part of relationships. So think about it, keep it in mind when you're communicating in whatever form it is, verbally or written, email, and just reflect on what it is that you're doing, and continue to practice. I think Rita made a comment in the chat earlier that by practicing, everyone gets good or better results. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, and the other thing I was going to suggest too, if you wanted to continue finding out more information, quite a bit of the content we've provided today is in our professional learning, which is on our website as well too, and that was shared in the chat as well. Yes, you'll receive a link to the recording, and it will sit on our website as well. Don't forget to go to our website and have a look. We've got many varieties of resources for you to have a look at. So it would be really great to continue having those conversations about communication and mental health and wellbeing in early childhood, and improving your capacity to understand children's social and emotional learning and wellbeing as well too.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye then.